Hello there, my name's Paul Roberts. I'm from Tuscany Networks and I'm here today to show you our DNS Contingency Switcher product. Now, Contingency Switcher runs on Infoblox and QIP platforms. The version I'm going to show you here is the Infoblox version. It runs within Blocks tools, so on NIOS 5 you run this on your Gridmaster. On NIOS 6 you get the opportunity to run this on pretty much any member you choose within the grid. We can also run it in a virtual machine environment on a completely separate box, so you don't actually have to have Infoblox hardware to run this. So the idea of a contingency switcher is to help you switch numerous quantities of DNS records from live to backup services. So if you're running contingent data centers, for instance, you might want to switch tens or hundreds, if not thousands, of DNS records, in the event of a failure or a business continuity test or something. So what we're going to do here to start off with is log in as administrator. So this is the Infoblox administrator. We're using Infoblox authentication here. So it's based upon your Infoblox credentials. The first thing the system will do is prompt you to select a DNS view. So we're just going to use the default DNS view here in the system. And then it will go and query the system for any existing services that have been defined. So we can see here we've got some services based in the UK. We've got a tree down the left hand side here, so we can actually filter these services. So we click on BAS, it stands for Basingstoke. Then we've got some Basingstoke related services. And what we can see here is a friendly name, an FQDN, which is what the end user is actually going to look up and resolve, and then a list of available hosts and what mode those hosts are available in, whether it's a live host or a backup host, etc. And we can see here that this is the current mode that's being used. They're currently in backup. So in fact what I could do is click on as many services as I like. In this case I'm going to select 2 services, and then from the actions menu I can just switch those. And by using these tags that have been defined next to the host IP address, I can specify whether I want to switch them into live or backup. So let's select live, actually switch these services back into live mode. The system submits that to a queue in the background, which then gets run, which is basically what's happening here. Just select OK. Again, the system's pulling the information out. All the information is actually stored within the Infoblox grid. There's no separate database or anything. And we can see now that these 2 services have been switched into live mode. So to give you an idea of actually what's happening under the covers, let's set up a new service and then we can go through all the details of how that service appears within Infoblox. So we're going to define a new service, and what we can do is build up a tree, a hierarchy on the left hand side. So let's define this as a US related service, and then we use a / just to delimitate the next part of the tree. Now we might like to specify a city, so let's try New York City, and then let's say this is a web server farm. So the FQDN in this case, let's use www. I've got a domain set up called test.com. Now we can specify the TTL on this record. You could use a 0 TTL, which is the default if you leave it empty, which basically means that this record won't be cached by other servers. So it means if you want to do a change, there's not those services, other services out there, other DNS servers won't be caching that record for so long. So I will set it to, let's say, 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. And then what we can do is specify a list of host names or IP addresses. Now if we specify IP addresses, the system will create DNS A records within Infoblox, and then it will switch the FQDN between those A records based on the mode, whether it's live or backup, for instance. If you use a name, then what the system will do is it will create an alias or a CNAME record from the FQDN to those particular names based on whether they're live or backup. So let's start off by using IP addresses, which will create A records for us. What we do now is we specify the IP address and then we tag it with the mode. So for instance, this particular IP address is the live address, whereas this one might be a backup address, and we could even have, you can have as many as you like and you can use whatever tag names you like. Let's call this one test. We can also specify which service is actually going to be live when we add this, so it will create an A record straight away for the live service that we enter in here. Or if we leave it blank, it won't actually make the service live. You'll have to do a service switch. So let's add that as a service. Okay, now the system will refresh the service list. It will pull this out of the grid. So we can see now we've got a new element in our tree. We expand it, we can see NYC, which was the city that we added, and then there's our service. We can see that it's currently 10.10. Now if I go to the Infoblox Grid Manager, let's go to the right zone, test.com. We can see here there's the www record that I added on 10.10. And what the system's done is it's created this text record. It's actually disabled, that's what the cross means, and it prefixes it with a dr name, dr dash, so we know that this entry was added by the contingency switcher. And then the contents of the text record basically contain the service details, which server is currently live, and then the other servers that are available and what mode they're available in: live, backup, test, etc. So that's how the system stores its data. It stores it within the DNS zone as a disabled text record. So that means all the information is backed up by the Infoblox backup mechanism, and it's replicated throughout the grid to a gridmaster candidate. So the system's fully resilient. There's no additional database or anything to worry about. So if we go back to this particular entry now, let's switch into backup mode. Again, I can use a tag, and keep an eye on the live host entry here, because what will happen is the IP address will change from 10.10 to 20.10, and the change will also be reflected within Infoblox. So we'll see that as well in a second. Okay, that's just refreshing the service list. Okay, so we can see now that the live host is actually the backup entry, 20.10. If I go to my Infoblox system, now this is the A record here we're interested in. If I refresh it, there we go. Did you see it change? Changed to 20.10, which is actually the backup entry. So basically what we've done is we've actioned a change in DNS without actually having to manually edit any hostname entries or IP addresses. So we're removing all that potential for making mistakes. Now let's add another service, but this time we'll use an alias. So I can demonstrate how this works. So let's add another one, and again we'll put it in the US, New York City, and then let's say it's FTP. It's an FTP service. Our FQDN is going to be ftp.test.com. Let's use another 5-minute TTL, and then this time I'm going to use host names. So I've already got a couple of A records defined. If I go back to Infoblox, you'll see I've got these entries here, ftp-live and ftp-backup. So I can actually enter those as the target for the C name. Test.com, let's tag it with live, and ftp-backup.test.com, and then let's tag that with backup. Now let's make FTP just live the current active host, add that as a service. There we go, service was added. Just going to refresh the service list now. So if I go back to Infoblox now and do a refresh, you'll see we've got an additional text record now which stores the contingency switching information, and there's the CNAME record that the system created pointing to FTP-live. So let's switch that one so we can see what happens. So just select that service, switch selected, and then let's switch it to backup mode. Right, so that will have now been switched. Let's just wait for the service list to refresh. There we go. So we can see now we're using names but in a backup mode. Go back to the Infoblox GUI and keep an eye on this CNAME record. If I just do a refresh, there we go, you can see it's now changed to FTP-backup. I can also select multiple entries, switch selected, and I can use either the common tags. So if you use common tags, I can switch them both back into live mode, or if I wanted to, I can select the individual services. I can specify what mode they're in. So this time I'm going to switch them both back into live mode. So you can imagine if you had, hundreds of services that you needed to switch, it'd be very easy to do using this mechanism. Now, if you've got a lot of services to define, what you can do is there's an import function. So to get the import format, if we just use the export function, all it does is it exports it to the screen. These are all the services that are currently defined, and it basically just uses a delimited format. So you can, for instance, take an entry from here and just modify it. So, for instance, let's take that entry there, and we'll just copy it into the paste buffer. And let's do an import, paste it back in. Now let's say we're going to use a TFTP server now. Okay, so let's change the FQDN name, but we're going to use the same hosts. Why not? And if we wanted to, should we do another one? Let's say this is going to be HTTPS. Okay, now I'll just do import. Import successful. Just wait for the service list to refresh. So you can see we can very easily add additional service definitions without typing them all in by hand. And of course, because we specified a live host, those will also appear in Infoblox as additional CNAME records. So you can see the additional text records appearing, and then you can see here's the HTTPS and there's the TFTP CNAME records. Something else that we've got is the ability to look at the audit log. So if someone's been doing some changes, or there's been a problem in the system, you can find out who did the change. Now we're logged in as admin, but obviously you see the Infoblox administrator name here, and whether they've been adding services and whether they've been switching. And you can just copy this out, literally just copy and paste. The only other thing that's left is to be able to switch to a different DNS view if you're using multiple DNS views. So that concludes the demonstration of Contingency Switcher. If you've got any queries, please drop us an email. My email address is paul.roberts@tuscanynetworks.com. Alternatively, you can visit our website at www.tuscanynetworks.com. Thank you very much for attending.